Tony Visconti, United States Marine Corps, World War II. Tony served with the 13th Marine Regiment, 5th Marine Division, as a corporal in the fire direction team. Tony is one of the many Marines that I interviewed who landed on Iwo Jima on D-Day, February 19, 1945. Iwo Jima, 8.5 square miles. From the air, it looks like a pork chop. And yet we lost almost 7,000 Marines killed on that island in the 36-day onslaught, over 20,000 Japanese killed. Uncommon valor was a common virtue on Iwo Jima. I'm proud to bring you Tony's story today. I interviewed Tony at Camp Pendleton, October 25th, 2005, and his story lives on. And I'm glad that many of you are watching these stories. I just got a message from a gentleman in the UK who served with the Royal Air Force. He said that he's had trauma issues, and watching some of my Vietnam stories with a tear in his eye has helped him. I know when I've interviewed a lot of my veterans, they've told me like a burden was lifted off their shoulders. So I know there's therapeutic value to talking about those experiences and for listening. And I'm thankful for those who have listened to these stories. I'd like to thank Barney Diamos for sponsoring this story, making it possible for me to share this with you in its entirety. Barney, God bless you. Thank you. I want to thank your father, Frank Diamos, for serving during World War II as a stretcher bearer on Okinawa. So he's bringing this message by Tony on behalf of his father, in honor of his father. So God bless you, sir, and for the great work that you're doing with our World War II veterans and with the shadow boxes and everything that you're doing right now. I just salute you. Thank you. Okay, folks, sit back. Let's watch Tony Visconti, his complete interview the way I recorded it 17 years ago. So I'm proud of my veterans. Tony and I got to become friends after our interview. And it doesn't happen with all my veterans, but Tony and I became friends, and I visited him several times afterwards. So I love you, Tony. I know you're in heaven watching, and I'm happy I'm able to share your story now. Thank you for watching and sharing. God bless you. Give me your rank and your job on Iwo Jima. What were you again? Tell me.
I was with the 13th Marine Regiment in the 5th Marine Division. The 13th Regiment was the artillery regiment for the division, and I was a corporal, and I was on the guns. I was in the instrument section attached to the fire direction center, and my job was to be a flash bang operator, counter battery operator. What that is I would try to locate their battery, their artillery through bursts, puffs of smoke with an instrument, with an azimuth instrument. I would turn my telescope towards it, get a reading, and relay it to the fire direction center. They would plot it on a board and determine elevation, distance, and everything. It's basically through triangulation, which the method is obsolete now. But okay. So that's the reason I had to be in high locations.
Okay, so you were a corporal now. Tell me, did you go in on the 19th of February?
Yeah, I landed the 19th of February, I believe, early afternoon.
Okay. Tell me what you remember about the night before the landing, where you were, what your thoughts were, and what you knew about Iwo Jima.
The night before, I was apprehensive, and considering what my job was going to be in a few hours, kind of nervous about it, and obviously a little scared, but we were ready. We were prepared to do what we were trained to do. And so looking for the big event, have nervous feelings in your stomach, but anxious to get it on. So.
Were you in combat before?
No, I was very fortunate. This was the first time. The 5th Marine Division, this was their first engagement. We had the luxury of being trained for a solid year, so we were well trained. And we had elements of the 1st and 2nd Division, some veterans that joined our division. John Basilone from the 1st Division was with the 5th and the 27th Regiment. So we had a good mixture of veterans and new people, and we were well trained. We were ready for what we had to do.
How old are you now?
I'm 80.
So you were 19? On Iwo?
I had a birthday on the 17th of February. We landed on the 19th, so I became 20. Yeah.
Tell me about the morning of the landing, getting up in the morning, what you remember about it as you would get ready to get into your boats and go to the shore. I mean, what were you scared? I mean,
Oh yeah, definitely. Scared is not. Scared is an appropriate word, if you can think of a bigger word for it. But scared, yes. Anticipating something that was going to happen, and I, with 3 divisions assigned to this engagement, because we didn't know too much about Iwo insofar as it predicted to be maybe 5 to 10 days, I said. And what went through my mind was that such a small island, 3 divisions, is half the Fleet Marine Force. So it didn't sit right in my mind that this was not a cakewalk. And so I became very apprehensive, but packed up, we got our gear ready, we were well trained. We had our assignments, we were supposed to rendezvous at a certain location on Iwo once we landed. Of course, that never happened. When we finally, actually I was standing on topside watching the pre-invasion fire, and the island was obliterated with smoke, and the Navy was shooting, firing their 5 and 16-inch shells. I heard stories that some of the shells were ricocheting off Mount Suribachi, so the ships on the other side of Suribachi had to be cleared because of the possibility of being damaged by one of our own shells. I think I was under the impression, usually artillery comes in a little later, once a beachhead is established, but in this particular case, things were pretty bad on the beach and they needed us there right away. So when we got the order to disembark on over the sides, over the cargo nets, and of course it was a situation that's been described before. As far as coming down on that, you have to time your entry into the landing boats because of the heaving of the landing boats and the ship, and you might be caught in the middle. And I understand that there were a few Marines that were crushed. So within 2 feet of my landing boat, I saw it coming in, and the ship was moving towards it. I just leaped into my landing boat. I didn't take the full use of the rungs going down. As I leaped in, I fell down, but they picked me up. But if I had gone down, I might have been caught. And,
did you go into a Higgins boat? Were you in a Higgins boat?
Yeah, Higgins boat. And the night before, I mean, because I'm a religious man, and I prayed for 2 things. I prayed for, one, that the sea would be calm, because once we get into these landing boats, they rendezvous and they just toss and turn all over the place. And you may be turning around for an hour before the wave is formed. And I didn't want to hit the beach sick, because if that happened, if they were shooting me, they'd put me out of my misery. So I prayed for that, and I said, the rest I hope I can take care of myself, that's all. And I prayed to survive, and I prayed for my fellow Marines.
Okay. I have a lot of thoughts talking with you about this. So the morning you got into your Higgins boats, and did you rendezvous and then line a departure and then head off to the shore?
That's correct, yeah. We kept circling until our entire wave were in the boats, and finally they got the order to line up, and then they opened up, and the sergeant in charge of the boat was an officer, I believe. You know, before getting in the boat, we had our rifles with a bullet in the chamber, but on the safety, in case there was an accident on the boat, you know. So once we got orders to go in, he said, I remember distinctly, he says, well, buckle your chin straps, we're going in, and take the safety off. So at that moment, you become an individual within yourself. I've had it described to me by a psychiatrist as the moment of truth. You know, it's the moment that, well, it's all coming up to this point, this is it. You know, so as we put our heads down and he opened up the throttle to head to the beach, we just were within ourselves. He said, well, this is it, what's going to happen to me right now, and this is not training, this is for real.
I can just imagine the thoughts going through your young mind. I mean, it's incredible. It's very intriguing to me. And then as you approached the shore, had the Japanese started firing at you? Do you remember, what did you see and hear?
Well, they were, as we were coming in, there were bullets going over our head, and the beach was being raked. And as soon as the ramp went down, we ran up. I was fortunate I didn't have to go through, wade through water. We were up, got up pretty close. The ramp went down, and I ran about 30, 40 yards and then dropped just short of the incline. It has a 15-foot incline there, and just buried my head in the volcanic ash. And I turned around to look at the beach, and one of the boats that came in took a direct hit. A mortar went in. I saw some bodies fly up in the air, and I knew then this wasn't maneuvers. This was for real. And I laid there for, I guess, I don't know how long it was, till I finally decided to get up and try to get up the embankment. And this particular moment was my first dead Marine that I saw. He was at the top of the embankment with his head down. He was fully in one piece. But apparently he took a bullet through the helmet and through the head, and so he was dead. And I didn't realize he was dead. For some stupid reason, I told him, hey, don't lay here. You got to keep moving. And I finally realized he didn't move. He was dead. And I've said this to my friends quite a few times. With all the noise that was going on Iwo, for that particular moment, when I looked down at him, there was utter silence around him. I didn't hear anything. It was like there was a beam around him. It was utter silence. And I finally shook my head and continued to run. So we never did get to where we were supposed to rendezvous. We kind of just make do whatever we could, because it was pretty horrible that first day.
So that initial landing, the casualties, you come in maybe the afternoon, you're thinking?
Yeah.
And then how do you mentioned a psychiatrist, the moment of truth. I mean, obviously it dawned on you the stark reality, this is war, and you have a job to do. So do you just press on and try to block out all the bad things you're seeing, or how do you handle that?
Well, my training to a large degree prepared me for it, but there's a gap in there where your human failures can come through, and we had several of my good buddies, well, two that I can think of, that trained with me, and that they were just as capable as I was, dedicated to their tasks. As soon as they hit the beach and with the bombardment, they lost it. And at that time, we used the word Asiatic, and they had to be taken off the beach, you know. So I looked for them and found out later that they just flipped. And it wouldn't take much because of the bombardment going back and forth from Suribachi and from the north end of the island. So we just hunkered down that evening. The beach was piling up, and I kept wondering why they kept sending in waves, and that we weren't moving anywhere. Yeah, I found out later that they had to get as many Marines on the beach that particular day or afternoon as they could, because the next day there was a big storm, which did materialize, and they couldn't make any landings. So that first day, 30,000 Marines were landed on the beach 3 miles long, and it was amazing. It was cluttered. We were just sitting there like sitting ducks. But we couldn't move. We were getting fire from all directions.
What's the sound of battle sound like? What do you remember? Do you go I mean, do you think about it today too? I mean, what's the sound of battle, and what are you hearing on those?
Well, the sound of battle obviously is degrees of noise. Mortars don't make as much noise as artillery shells. Mortars have a way of come whistling in. You can hear them whistling in, and you just drop immediately as they get louder and louder. Bombardment with mortars and artillery reach a decimal point that sometimes you can't handle. So you might put your hands up to your ears, pray a little bit, and just try to hunker it out as much as possible. Because you have been trained, you've been in training where you had artillery fire go over your head and things of that nature. With the battle comes the screams, the injuries, the crying out for help. Of course, we were still young kids, and a lot of crying out for mama. And it was horrible. I didn't see Iwo had a lot of mutilation insofar as injuries are concerned. I hadn't seen any up until then, except that one Marine who was intact. Of course, I saw some later on, but it frightens you. And we didn't see any enemy. All we saw puffs of smoke. They were all underground, and they were waiting for us.
So your first night, did you set up your? When did you begin doing the job that you were trained to do on the island?
Not till about 3 days later. We kind of our guns came ashore, and our guns were facing Mount Suribachi. We were supporting the 28th Regiment, and the fire direction centers where they compute everything, they had a big hole dug where they set up their drafting boards, and at that time they used slide rulers to determine facts. So, and I just lay outside waiting for orders. Now, when on the 23rd, I think the flag went up to 23rd, I was having my lunch. I think it was around 11 o'clock, I believe. And lunch consisted of K-rations, which was a big hunk of cheese and chocolate and Raleigh cigarettes. And then I heard a roar, and I looked up, and I saw the flag go up, and it was a welcome sight and relief, and there had been all kinds of adjectives to describe it, and all were authentic. We just the ships in the harbor all tooted their horns, and some Marines were shooting their rifles in the air. We patted each other on the back, and we cried. Some of us cried. I did, and immediately I received orders to get my gear together. To quote the exact words, is get my butt ready to go up to Suribachi and get my radio man, make arrangements for him. And so I loaded up with my transit, my tripod across my top of my pack. I was loaded up with hand grenades in both my sides, and my rifle, and I took my radio man, and we started climbing the mountain, trying to find a place. The good Lord was with us. There was many mines at the bottom, and apparently, obviously, we got through it all right. Climbing the mountain was a chore because it was very steep. Then we had to look out for caves because there were caves all over the place. And landmines, and fortunately, we made it to the top. As soon as we got to the top, I set my tripod up, and there was another flashbang operator on the other side, and we coordinated with each other. If I saw a target, I would swing to it, and he would swing to it, and through triangulations, we would get a reading. So I made a perfect target. I didn't think about it at the time because I stood up, and you could see me for 2 miles away, and I got a picture that shows that, and I looked at it, and I says, God, you're lucky. So I was up there about a day and a half, I think, and the flag the flag was always fully extended because there was a very stiff breeze up there. And to this day, I can flash back and I can hear the flag going. You know, in your video, you showed that. You heard the noise of the ruffling of the flag, and that's always stuck in my mind. Anytime I see a flag extended, I hear it. And the sight up there was awesome.
Tell me, this is one of the questions I usually ask at the end, but tell me what the American flag means to you today.
It means blood, sweat, and tears. It means that is the symbol. It's only a piece of cloth. They tell me, well, I don't buy that. It's a cloth that's representative of the sacrifices made by our ancestors, by the people that supported us, the people that stayed at home. It represents the greatest country in the world, and I am particularly alert as to where a flag is, and if I see it, for some people, it may be touching the ground, I will pick it up. We were taught always that it never touches the ground. So it means everything to me. I can get teary-eyed over it, and so it represents what we're made of, what makes us the great country we are.
Were you on Iwo the whole 36 days?
Yeah, well, pretty much so. Yeah, about 32, 34, something like that.
Tell me what happened after the flag raising till the end of the campaign. What were you doing? What was the other Marines doing?
Well, I got received orders to come down. I came down, and our guns were set up just on the south side of the first airfield. So I was sent up to the front lines on one occasion, just there to be at the infantry's disposal if they needed some fire. We were supposed to try to pick up some enemy targets for them. And we spent several days up there with them, then came back when we weren't needed. I did see the first B-29 that landed on the first airfield, actually the only one at that time.
Tell me about that, and then tell me about the bomb doors not closing.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that before, so tell me that story.
Well, I think it was maybe 14 days after we landed, 15 days. Of course, you lose track of time, but they were still fighting for the first airfield. We were at the north end, and so our guns were very close by, and I looked up, and I saw this big bird. I hadn't seen anything as big as this one. Up until then, I think the Liberators, the 24s, were maybe about the biggest bombers. I saw this thing coming, flying overhead, and it was heading south, which would be going towards Saipan and Tinian, their home base. And I kept watching it, and as it went over Suribachi, it made a turn and started to go north. And I said, my God, it's coming towards us. And as it cleared Suribachi, it took some maneuvering because immediately once he got over that, Suribachi was about 550 or 60 feet tall. Once he got over that, he had to bring it down kind of quick. And he landed. He landed on the first airfield, and people gathered around him. And the crew, I think they have a crew of 10 people. They all came out and ran for cover, and they did get it fixed. And the problem was, and I found out what the problem was later on at one of our reunions, the 29 had been on a bombing run over to Tokyo, and in dropping its bombs, they were able to drop their bombs, but in trying to close the bomb bay doors completely, they weren't able to do it, so they were partially open. And there was no way, they had to get out of their location, so they started coming back. But with the doors being open partially, they were using too much fuel. They didn't have enough fuel to get back to their home base. So we were in the middle there, Iwo Jima, And so they said, well, we've got to land. And they did land, and they were ever so grateful that we were there. And at that particular time, we fully realized why we went to Iwo Jima, because it's a worthless piece of property. I think maybe it might have been at the bottom of the ocean 5,000, 10,000 years ago, and it just came up in time. And unfortunately, I found out later from one of the pilots at one of our reunions that the crew was lost on another mission. So it was sad. It was sad, but that's the way things go, I guess. And in that time of our lives, you're lucky to be alive, and for the amount of time you have, and when it comes, it comes. And when you're in warfare, it's bound to happen. So.
Tell me about Father Bradley on the island. Did you see him? Did you know him then?
No, I didn't know him until we got onto Iwo. As I say, our guns were facing Suribachi, and he was chaplain of the 28th Regiment. And
tell me how you encountered him, met him, and what took place that you saw.
Yeah, well, we did have a lull. You know, there were times that there was some quiet on Iwo, and then all of a sudden all hell would break loose. So I was around the fire direction center, and I saw this chaplain walking up towards me, and I looked at him. I says, Father, you don't have your helmet on. He says, well, son, he said, I look too much like you guys with a helmet on, and I want to be noticed, so I put a cloth cap with a big cross on the top. And I says, you don't mind me asking you, Father, but you're carrying a 45 there. He says, well, they didn't ever sign a Geneva Conference, so I feel at liberty to not only save souls, but save Marines, he said. And so somehow I found out, where are you from, Father? Because he's older than I am, you know. I'm just a 20-year-old kid. I think he was 8, 9 years older than me. He says, I'm from Brooklyn. I said, oh my God. I said, I'm from the Bronx. He says, you are? Yeah. I says, yeah, we must be neighborhood. You know, I says, this is a term that's only understood by people that live in the area, you know. And because Brooklyn and the Bronx were arch rivals, always, you know. So I felt very much at ease with him, you know. And I encountered, that's the way I encountered him on Iwo. And for some reason, I was gravitated to him. He spoke with authority, and he just exuded confidence, you know. And we fortunately got back to Hawaii, made it back alive. I made a practice of attending his masses. First mass I attended, very, very stern up there, and he instructed the shore patrol to close the doors. He says, nobody leaves till I leave. Because the Catholics have a habit after communion, they go right out the door, you know. So he impressed me some more that way, and I attended his masses, and I always thought he was the man I looked up to.
Did you attend any masses on Iwo Jima that he had, or?
Not him. I did have my own. I had 2 chaplains. Well, when I was at 13th Marines had their own chaplain, and the 28th had theirs, and 13th was Father James D.C., who taught at Santa Clara University. And I would attend Mass with him before, during, and after, but in between I would somehow gravitate to Bradley. They were direct opposites. Bradley was very articulate, fire and brimstone. D.C. was very easygoing, and he reminded me of an old movie I saw, Lost Horizon, and he reminded me of the High Lama. Very easy to go on to get along with, and he told me about Santa Clara University, and he described it, and he says, you must come up to see me. So after the war, we drove up there, but he wasn't there at the time. So I had 2 chaplains that I really looked up to.
And what about his hat? Had a little gold cross on it. Is that a gold baseball cap? Is that what Father Bradley wore?
Yes, yeah. Well, it was. I think he had it painted on or he was very, very, very much enamored by his men. They felt he was one of them, and so I lost track of him for all that time. And I always thought him as my. I've been interviewed a few times, and they always asked me who did you look up to? And I says, well, I had my fellow Marines I looked up to, but there was one man that I particularly gravitated to, and that was my Father Bradley, and so he basically was my hero. And we found out that he had retired in New Jersey, and my wife, looking through the telephone book, found him. I have a son that lives there. Every time we visit him, I says, I heard Father Bradley retired somewhere in New Jersey. So she found him, and we talked to him on the phone, and he says, I said, Father, I want to come down and see you. He says, by all means, come down. I says, where's your, and he gave me the location, and he was preaching at St. John the Baptist. And I said, I'd like to make your mass. Well, we got a little bit lost, but I got there towards the end, and we walked down the aisle, and he saw us, and he said out loud, "There's one of the fellows that won the war for you." I wanted to put my head between my legs. I was so embarrassed, and so then he took us over to his home. Am I rambling too long? He took us to his home, and we came up. As we come up the path, the entrance walk, there's a flagpole with the flag flying up there, and there's the dog was barking, and he told the dog, "Hush up, Iwo." He called him Iwo. He says, "This is Iwo too. The first one died," he said. So, and we had a nice session with him. He took us out to lunch, and I offered to pay, but he wouldn't allow it. As we were sitting there, and he had two assistants with him. Rose was there and another woman, because he was partially blind at the time. And as we, in the restaurant, we talked, and two or three people come over. Two judges came over. I saw the Monsignor there. I said, "How are you, Monsignor?" And they talked with them. He was well recognized there. So we had a pleasant evening. When we came home, after we talked some more, went over some of his memorabilia, I says, "Well, Monsignor, we got to go home now. We got to get back to my son's house." He says, "Let me give you my blessing." And he says, "I will give you my blessing so you have a safe trip to your son's house and a safe trip from New Jersey back to California." He says, "After that, you're on your own." And that was the Monsignor. That's the way he talked. He related.
Now, I'll probably come back to Father Bradley. I want to ask you a question on Iwo Jima now. Were you on Mount Suribachi the whole time, or did you come down?
No. I was up there just for about a day and a half, maybe 2 days.
Okay.
Then I was told to come down.
Okay, did you get into combat yourself with firing a weapon? I mean, could you get into any of that, or?
On 2 occasions, I fired into a cave. Thought I saw a puff of smoke up there. So basically, I did not get into it to the extent that the infantry does, So I saw plenty, but I give credit to the infantry people who really took the brunt of the entire invasion.
Well, if these Japanese are underground, Tony, how did we end up killing 21,000 of them?
I never, Larry, I didn't see any Japanese individuals till maybe the last week or so. It was pretty demoralizing to see our dead Marines laying all over the place. And we never saw Japanese soldiers. I finally went by a cave, and the stench was pretty bad. So I took a look in there. I was pretty cautious because you were told not to enter. And they had stacked their bodies up there. They just drag them in, and so that we wouldn't see their bodies. And it was a psychological practice And it was working for a while. I mean, it just truckloads and truckloads of dead bodies coming in. I just recall it just always the feet laying flat on their back and the foot straight up, you know, and that's the sight I remember. And anyway, just taking them off, just like a sack of potatoes. So it was horrendous up there.
Did you by chance see the 5th or 4th Division cemetery on Iwo Jima?
I saw our cemetery.
Did you walk through it at all? Or
Oh yeah, I walked through it, and
what were your thoughts?
on the day we finally were told to pack your gear, you're going to leave, we assembled somewhere near the 5th Marine Division Cemetery before we made our exit to the beach. And as I looked through the cemetery, and then directly in the background was Mount Suribachi, and I looked up there and I said, God, if we could go, I was up there, and I'm down here looking at these rows and rows of crosses, and of course there were Stars of David there too. And I had a very empty feeling. It was a feeling that the amount of people we came with, that we're going to leave some behind, quite a bit behind. So it was very sorrowful. There are some people I've talked to said they felt that they should stay with them, you know, underground if they had to. They should have died. Why them? Why not me? And I had quite a few friends that were killed, and all I could say is I'd pray for them, and I'm how fortunate I've got a life. They don't have one.
Well, why do you think you came back, Tony? A lot of those guys, like you said, didn't. Do you ever think about that?
Well, I think, as far as I'm concerned, I always thought I had a guardian angel. I still think so. There's many things I've done in life that somebody pushed me in the right direction. And why, I don't know. God has a plan, as far as I'm concerned, and maybe it was His plan that I survive, and that I have a life and I have a family. And as for the 18, 19, 20-year-old real heroes of Iwo, I don't know why. I don't have the ability, and no one has, to determine why. It's just, it all depends. I feel maybe in some future life that maybe the situation will reverse. They'll get a chance and I'll go down. It's kind of a left field approach, but you know, the thing that bothered me the most, if I can say, I says, well, I got a good chance of getting killed here. But this godforsaken place, 7,000 miles away or so, who's going to come to see me? That's the thing that went through my mind, you know. I don't know how, but why it came about. But usually, you know, obviously when people die, they're buried in a cemetery, you visit the cemetery. So nobody's going to come see me here. He said, I don't mind dying, but by God, I want somebody to come see me if it's possible. So that ran through my mind. And we accepted that fact that we could die, could get killed. It was obvious. We were trained for that. And it was just a matter of, well, maybe it'll happen to somebody else. And if it does, I feel bad about it. Maybe it'll happen to me, and I hope they feel bad about it. Because we were attached to our buddies, and we're very much concerned about each other.
What's your thoughts about Iwo Jima today, 60 years later? I mean, does it have any significance in your life? What does it mean to you?
The meaning, when I left the island, I said to myself, why such a big toll in casualties? All the effort that was put into a piece of property that Mother Nature never endowed it with any water, any greenery. It was just a volcanic island. Why did we have to spend so much human blood there? Later on I found out, insofar as the Air Force disabled planes, B-29s landing on Iwo, because of the availability of the airfield, that we saved probably over 20,000 airmen's lives, and we lost 7 of our own with the Navy, 7,000. So it's a harsh word, but there's the trade-off, and that was the reason we were there. And to this day, the Air Force, the bomb group that flew over Japan, they attend our reunions, and they continually thank us for it. So that was my feeling about Iwo. It was a terrible price to pay, but 20,000 more, a little bit more than 20,000 as opposed to 7,000. That's a good trade-off, but if you're a parent of one of the 7,000, it's maybe not worth it for the parent, you know. So we can understand that.
What would you say in relation to almost 2,000 Americans killed today in Iraq versus the 7,000 that were killed in 36 days on Iwo, or the several thousand killed on Omaha Beach on D-Day? How would you put in perspective, because, you know, the news media is making a big deal out of, you know, we've lost almost 2,000 troops in 2 years or whatever. How would you put that in relation to the casualties in World War II?
Well, it's, in terms of numbers, it doesn't even compare. And you can, well, say the first day we landed on Iwo, we had 2,500 casualties that first day. And I've been told that equals, if not surpasses, Normandy the first day. I've been told that. And so right then and there, in 30 days, we had 7,000 Marines and sailors killed, and maybe some Army personnel later on. That was in a time frame of 30 days, and two years we had 2,000. So there's no, I mean, in a sense, in that comparison, in today's thinking, they would have evacuated us. The press would have got us in so much difficulty that we would have got in our boats and took off. So the bottom line is the press is building up these casualties, which is it's regrettable. Every time I hear somebody goes down, I dip my head down and say a prayer for them. You know, I'm affected by it. But we never would have won World War II with the thinking that exists today. Sacrifices were made not only by the men, but the men and women that stayed at home. If they didn't supply us, we wouldn't have won. So that's why maybe it's the greatest generation. You got the home front, in my mind, equaling the young men and some women at the time doing the battles. If we didn't have the means to defend ourselves, to fly planes, to ride ships, we're dead, you know. So fortunately, we had 2 oceans protecting this country. We weren't bombed. It doesn't exist now, but at that time, our industrial power was able to keep us afloat. So I'm thankful for the home front.
You heard the question, but I want to ask you, what does freedom mean to you, Tony?
Freedom means to talk to you right now, to say that I disagree with what you're saying, and the fact that you won't be angry at me for saying that, or if the situation is reversed, I wouldn't be angry to you if you said something like that. Freedom means the right to get up in the morning and to go to work and to come home and have your dinner and talk to your kids, maybe get in a discussion with them. Freedom means to vote. If I need to disagree with some politician, my biggest way of disagreeing with him is to exercise my privilege to vote. I just can't take the fact that I don't agree with him and therefore I have to go along with it because I don't have freedom to exercise my anger towards him, if I have to say that. And freedom means to me what it meant to the people in the Revolutionary War. They rebelled against Great Britain, and because of excise tax, I guess, and they wanted freedom to make their own decisions. So, and they did something about it. And I respect what they did. I respect what we did in the Civil War, we freed the slaves to a certain degree, and so far as the Second World War, it wasn't for the United States from day one. There wouldn't be a Europe. The Marshall Plan, feeding Europe with food. After communists, I'm getting into politics too much.
Get off politics.
Yes, sir. Okay, but freedom means everything.
What about the price for freedom? What would you tell a young person today about the price for freedom?
The freedom was bought and paid for by the young men and women in the past, in many cases with their lives. And you could do no less, because you're part of the family that existed a long time ago, and you need to defend what they did for you. And if it means dying, then you have to die. If I could die for my country, then I don't think there's any better way that I can leave this earth. At least I died for a cause, which was fought for over 200 years ago. So freedom means everything. Freedom is worth dying for.
What do you think our country's forgetting about World War II? And if so, why should we remember?
I don't think it's forgetting about it now. The last 4 or 5 years, we've been kind of put in a spotlight which we were not accustomed to being in. We came home, those was lucky to come home, tried to adjust to civilized living and get a job, continue with our lives. And so talking about the war never entered our minds, and we just did, we won, now let's move on. So I didn't feel hurt by the fact that through all the years that we weren't recognized or talked about, but when it finally came about, I'd say within the last 7 or 8 years, we come to the forefront, and maybe by Tom Brokaw wrote that book, Greatest Generation, things started to materialize after that. So,
Do you think it's important that we remember then? I mean, as far as what happened?
oh yes, it certainly is important to remember what happened. Why? Because this country was on its knees though. After Pearl Harbor. 75% of our Navy was destroyed. We were ready to capitulate. The Japanese, their intent was, I guess, to inflict terrific damage and have us negotiate with them. So for about a year or so, I think we were taking it on the chin, so to speak, until, in the Pacific at least, till Guadalcanal turned it around. And then we started our march across the Pacific Ocean. So it means an awful lot. And the sacrifices, obviously, are tremendous. And I don't care what war you're in. War is war, whether it's in Europe or it's over here in the Pacific. You die, you get shot at, you freeze, you perspire, and you smell the stench of death. You know, Iwo, there was 2 prevalent smells: sulfur smell and the stench of death. Those were both prevalent because Iwo was a sulfur island.
Do you remember the island pretty well? I mean, as far as the contour, the volcanic ash, I've even asked, do you remember sleeping, eating, all these things?
Oh yes,
You
the second.
Did you guys take showers of any kind? You probably
No showers. Not until I don't know if we took any aboard ship on the way back. Salt water had to be converted or something. No,
Do you remember leaving Iwo Jima, how you felt when you actually left?
Yes,
Did you look back and wave?
Right. And then we assembled on the beach, and the LSTs pull up right to the beach, and they put down the gate. And I turned around, and like I said before, I looked up at Suribachi, I looked at the graveyard. And Marines would understand this. I just had what you call a bulkhead stare. You're looking, but you're not seeing, you know. And just like a bunch of animals, they said, get aboard ship, and we herded. We got aboard ship, and we just sat down on the ground, just humped over, and kept looking back, and felt very sad because you could see the crosses, and I could see Suribachi, and I could see the flag, and I said, God, it was up there, and that's what it's all about. The flag's up, and this is a graveyard here.
Just briefly tell me about the camaraderie of the Marine Corps.
Oh, it is number one. It is what they instill in you. It's taught to you and starts out in boot camp. It develops as you leave boot camp and go through your training, and it solidifies, especially when you know you're going into combat. Just to digress a little bit if I can, I played with the division baseball team, and I tore up my knee on sliding into second base, so I was in the hospital for about a month and a half. And then when I got word that my division was ready to ship out, and after they took that cast off, I worked my butt off to get my knee strengthened up. I wanted to go with my buddies. I didn't want to stay behind. So that's what it's all about. I exercised till they let me go, and I was able to join my troops, my comrades.
Is it truly once a Marine, always a Marine?
I would think so, yeah. I would know so, yeah. We see each other. We don't know each other. We're all old fogies, I guess, but we will say Semper Fi to each other. So, yeah.
Tell me just a few more minutes we got. Tell me a little bit more about Father Bradley, your relationship with him, and what type of man he was. Just for a few more minutes.
Well,
some fond memories, or just what we talked about yesterday or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Well, when we finally located him, my wife did in New Jersey, and we spent time with him. I told Monsignor I should be back next year. I'd like to look you up. He says, by all means, come. I'll look forward to it. So I think for about 3 years in a row, we were able to make contact with him, and each time Rose says, he's not doing too well, but he wants to see you. I remember one particular occasion we got down there a little late, as always, and we sat down in his family room, and you've been there. The walls are just covered with memorabilia. I told him, Father, I said Monsignor, but many times I said Father. I says, I'm sorry, Father, I mean Monsignor. He says, you can call me anything you want to call me. I said, you look tired. You look tired, Monsignor. He says, well, Anthony, I've been up all night. He says, I got a call at maybe 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. The little girl was hit by a car, and the mom wanted me to come to the hospital to pray for her. And she came over and picked me up. So I spent most of the night at the hospital, and I prayed for her. And he says, she recovered, he says. So I didn't get much sleep. He said, and he looked me in the eye. He said, like we used to say in the Marine Corps, he says, I feel like crapping out. And I just almost fell off my chair when he said that, I says, well, Father, we won't be long. No, we're going to have lunch. We're going to have lunch. Rose, call Rose, prepare some lunch on the double. And because she knew him well, so she took it all in.
Did you know him after the war every single year, or was there a big gap of time and then you were reacquainted with him? Or it sounds like
there was a big gap. I really didn't hook up with him until my son moved to New Jersey for a business move, and then I heard that he retired.
Right. So all those years you didn't have any contact?
But I always thought of him. In fact, I told my wife, I says, I believe in a guardian angel, and I call him Bradley. So it's no contact, but after we made contact, we made it a point every time we went back to drive the 60 miles to his house and have lunch with him, just talk.
How did you feel, and where were you when you heard about his death?
We We were on vacation, I think, and so there was a message when we come back on our phone unit there, and it was Rose, and she told me, she said, Tony, so Tony, I got some bad news for you. The Monsignor passed away. He says, and I got the baseball cap too. If you want me to relate that a little bit, or about the cap. Well, the cap was a memorabilia of his old days and as a young man in Brooklyn, where he sold hot dogs in Ebbets Field, where the Dodgers played. So my intent was to get a cap and just to reminisce for him, make him perk up a little bit. And she says, I've got the cap, but he passed away. He says, what shall I do with it? I says, you keep it. You're going to have some kind of a museum for him or whatever. Put the cap in there because that's part of his youth, you know. And she says, okay, I'll do that. So my association with the Monsignor went through a long gap of nothing till I finally realized what I wanted, hopefully would meet him someday. And then it became, for about 3, maybe 4 years, an annual visit to his home because my son lived in New Jersey. So on the last visit, my son came with me. I have a picture of us with the Monsignor, and he looked pretty sick then. So I felt bad. I had to bowl the next day. My wife and I bowl, and I had a bad time at the alley. I felt like crying. I knew at 91 we could not live that long, but it's tough to see him go.
Now, you didn't go to his funeral service. You were
No,
on vacation
no.
or something?
The funeral services, no. When that happened, I was on the West Coast, and I didn't go to it. Rose said they were going to have 3 masses for him at different churches,
They did.
and she says the whole town is in mourning. So he was. My wife wrote a poem pertaining to the Monsignor, and he was so overtaken by it. He called us up and thanked her no end for it. And Rose liked it quite a bit, and she had it put a big print on a big picture, and she showed it to us when we were down there. I've got the poem with me, but he really was very appreciative of it.
You think he was an American patriot? I mean, is that appropriate, you think?
Very appropriate. He would end his masses. Every mass he said, he'd end it with "God bless America." And one church that was in financial trouble, he pulled it out for him. And all the time he was there, maybe 20 years, he never took a salary. He lived on what the Navy gave him in pension. So he was a patriot, and he was a true disciple of God. 64 years a priest. He was the combination of the two. You can't beat him. That's why he was so well liked.
Think he's looking down on us today, maybe?
Oh, I'm sure he is. You know something? This is ridiculous, but in my slumber one time, I thought I saw a black figure go through the front of my bed. Somebody in a black coat. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, but I looked and I winked, and I think he got back to us. I think we mentioned Philadelphia to him on 2 occasions where we were going to have a reunion. He says, "I'll be there." And because I spoke to Rose, and Rose says he can't make it. So I told Rose he'll be there, one way or the other. He'll be there. And when I got up to talk at the memorial service, I felt his presence there. So he was my hero.
Me too, in the short time I knew him. It's just amazing. Come into his life at that late date, and I think he really befriended me for some reason, and he felt comfortable with me, and I mean, those memories will be there always. You know, I spent 2 days with him,
You know, when we left, I thought this last time, I says, I don't think we're going to see him again. So I walked up to him, He was in his wheelchair. I says, Monsignor, I know in the Navy we're not supposed to salute without cover, because I want to salute you. So he says, by all means, you know. So I stepped back and salute him. Then he had a big Irish grin on his face, and he had blue eyes. A twinkle in his eyes says, carry on. And that was the last we saw. You know, and I felt it was going to be that. He was a great man. Great for this country, and even greater for God.
Speaking of salutes, you know me. Can I have you do a salute into the camera when I tell you when? Would you
Sure.
do it for me? Okay, this just into the camera, Tony. Go ahead.